Yogena chittasya padena vancham malam sharirasya cha vaidikena yopakurotam pravaram muninam padanjalim pranjali anatosmi stve padanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam katra sutrasya bhashyasya kramad vivaranasya cha. Some of these sutras are highly philosophical, and unlike the previous sutras, that we discussed till now, these sutras refer to some of the prominent schools of Indian philosophy, especially the Buddhist school. So I think I discussed the 13th sutra of Kaivalyapada. So today we discuss this 14th Parinamayigatvat Vastu Tattvam and Vastu Swami Chitta Bheda Tayohu Vibhakta Pantha. Two sutras are very, very important. And also the next one, of course, Nachaiga Chittatantram Vastu Tada Pramanagam Tada Kim Syat. So these sutras are interpreted by commentators as a reference to some of the philosophical schools which are prevalent during Patanjali's time. So, in fact, some of these sutras have given rise to the popular view among scholars that Patanjali lived after Buddha. But we have to remember the interpretation comes mostly from Vyasa. So, connecting these sutras with Vijnanavada is essentially a contribution of Vyasa, and of course the succeeding lineage of commentators. So the first sutra is Parinamayigatvat Vastu Tattvam. What it means is this. I mentioned this earlier. Ekatvam means Parinamayikatvam. Three guna, Sattva guna, Rajo guna, and Tamo guna, when they evolve together, that the result is object. In other words, the compact unity and oneness of all objects are due to the simultaneous evolution from Prakriti. And Prakriti, we should remember, Prakriti Pradhana. It consists of Sattva guna, Rajo guna, and Tamo guna. So when these three gunas evolve together, the result is this objective world. Now, it is in this context that Patanjali, or maybe Vyasa to be more precise, refers to some of the existing schools of thought in Buddhism. Vastu Swami Chitta Bhedat Tayoho Vibhakta Pantha. This sutra cannot be understood unless we understand, we get a full picture of Vijnanavada. So, Vijnanavada essentially implies that objective world doesn't have an existence independent of a perceiving mind. In other words, when you perceive an object, then only that object as an ontological reality. See, this is the Vijnanavada view. I shall try to explain this in the light of some of the fundamental texts in Vijnanavada. To begin with, a brief introduction to the evolution of Buddhist thought. So those of you who are listening to this for the first time, when I refer to Buddhism, you may get the wrong impression that Patanjali is talking about Buddha or Buddha's teachings. Absolutely wrong. Remember, Vijnanavada It's also called subjective idealism, coming from scholars like Dharmakirti and others. This Vijnanavada is a school of philosophy that developed maybe around 400 years after Buddha's passing away. Buddha originally did not give rise to any of these philosophical systems. Buddha's teachings were basically kind of applied humanistic interpretation of Upanishadic philosophy. So whatever he taught were recorded in Pali canonical literature, which are known as Tripitaka, Sutta Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka, Abhidhamma Pitaka, which all together deal with the Buddhist disciplines to be practiced, to be followed by Buddhist monks, some of the fundamental philosophical doctrines. Sutta Pitaka contains this Dhammapada, which is a highly philosophical works, not very large work, small work, and Abhidhamma Pitaka. So Sutta Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka, Abhidhamma Pitaka, which all deal with different aspects of Buddhist monastic order, disciplines, and also highly humanistic, ethical teachings of Buddha. Almost 300 years, 350 years after Buddha's passing away, which must have taken place, according to some scholars, at 480 BC, different schools of Buddhism evolved. It's called the four schools of later Buddhism. They are known as Sautrantika and Vaibhashika, which are realistic schools, implying that they accepted the reality of external objects independent of the perceiving mind. That's the implication of realism in Buddhist tradition, more or less of course, it is different from phenomenalism as understood in Western philosophy. But anyway, those two schools of realism linked to Hinayana Buddhism is called Sautrantika and Vaibhashika schools of philosophy. They accepted the reality of an objective world independent of a perceiving mind. They are realistic schools, mostly linked to Hinayana school of Buddhism. More traditional, they gave more importance to the Pali canonical literature. The other school, Mahayana Buddhism, that's a source of two schools of idealism. One is Shunyavada, the other is Vijnanavada. Of Shunyavada taught that that is truth, existence, dissolution, all these are relative and all these are linked to our sankalpas, our thoughts. And what Buddha taught was only the relative phenomenon. That's called, according to the school of Shunyavada. These are very important to understand the deeper implications of these 2-3 sutras. That's why I'm trying to explain. It's not easy, of course, to give a full picture of these different schools of philosophy, but it is important to understand what Vijnanavada actually implies. And to understand Vijnanavada, you should also know the other school of idealism called Shunyavada. So according to the Shunyavada, there are two types of truths. One is Samvriddhi Satya, or relative, phenomenal reality, that is the universe and everything else. The other is Paramarthika Satta, Aupacharika Satta and Paramarthika Satta, Samvriddhi Satyam and Paramarthika Satyam, the relative and absolute. And absolute reality is Shunya. It is beyond all descriptions and definitions. So Nagarjuna says in the Madhyamika Karika, Mula Madhyama Shastra, which is the Bible of Shunyavada, sarva ubalambho shama prapanchopashama shiva na kvajit kasyachit kaschit dharmo buddhena deshita. Means Buddha did not teach this highest truth of shunya to anyone because it cannot be taught. It is beyond description. It is beyond definition. And is aprahinam, asampraptam, anuchinnam, ashashwadam, aniruddham, anutpannam, edat nirvanam, uchyade. This is the definition of spiritual enlightenment according to Madhyamika Karika, which again, remember, it is the Bible of Shunyavada, school of Buddhist idealism. Those who want to see the text, we can see maybe the 25th chapter, 3rd verse. That is aprahinam, asampraptam, anuchinnam, ashashwadam. Nirvanam, or spiritual enlightenment, is defined by Shunyavada in this language. Aniruddham, anutpannam, edat nirvanam, uchyade. What is nirvana? Nirvana is something that you cannot get rid of and you cannot obtain it. It is neither eternal nor non-eternal. It has neither beginning nor end. So, in other words, it is beyond description, beyond verbalization, beyond definition. And it is the ultimate goal of all human beings to reach this nirvana when you get beyond the transmigratory cycle of praditya samutpada, which means we go beyond this birth, life, and death, and these 3 levels of existence, and we become one with our own absolute reality, which is shunya, which is beyond definition, description, and verbalization. This is Shunyavada idealism, which did not accept anything as a objective existence. Now, in total contrast to this, another school of idealism developed in Buddhism. Remember, all this happened centuries after Buddha's passing away. So when you are reading this, listening to this, and when you find the Vyasa in his commentary on Yoga Sutras, and later you can find all these ideas much more in a much more profound language explained by Shankaracharya in his refutation of Vijnanavada. You should remember, they were not refuting Buddha's teachings. They were refuting some philosophical schools which emerged in Buddhist tradition centuries after Buddha's passing away, maybe 400 years after Buddha's passing away. People who don't understand this philosophical lineage and tradition will suddenly get the wrong impression that Patanjali refuted Buddha. Now, Buddha is a great man, great humanist. So people who don't understand this tradition, people who don't keep in mind that Vijnanavada or Buddhist school of subjective idealism is actually much more profound than George Berkeley's subjective idealism, his 18th century philosophical school, which actually is very superficial, because Buddhist subjective idealism is very, very profound. And all the historians of Western thought also acknowledge the fact that any trace of subjective idealism that you find in Plato, and of course later on in Berkeley's classical works, that is only a distant echo of the ideas of Dignaga, Vasubandhu, and other Asanga and other Buddhist philosophers were actually the great exponents of Vijnanavada. Now, what did Vijnanavada teach? One important teaching was samsaram swapnamayakyam nacha karma vinashyati. That it means this external world, this world, objective world, it is actually non-existent except when we perceive it. So when you perceive a chair in front of you, then it has got an ontological status. If you don't perceive it, it doesn't exist. That's because these Vijnanavadins believe the Vijnanam or Chittam alone exists. So in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, you find two terms, Vastu and Chittam you find. Vastu means, Vastu or Artha means an object, objective world, what you perceive. The perceived object is Vastu. Chitta means the perceiving mind. So external object has no existence independent of the perceiving mind. To that extent, Vijnanavada can be said to be the original source of Berkeley's subjective idealism. But Berkeley brings in God. He says, for example, the entire universe of creation is a creation of different independent, different individual minds and God's mind. Now, the Vijnanavada scholars, thinkers like Dignaga, Vasubandhu and others, they don't bring God idea at all. They are, in that respect, they are very, very objective. So, Deshemi Sunyada Nityam Shashvachedavabjidam Samsaram Supnamayakyam Nacha Karma Vinasyadi. That is an important statement that's coming from Langavadara Sutra, which is one of the important texts in Buddhist tradition. It is a well-known text. It is important mostly for Vijnanavadis, and sometimes Shunyavadins also quote this. Now you can come to this sutra proper, because with this background, and when we read Vyasa's commentary, we will know more about this. Now, in the sutra you find Vastu Same Chitta Bheda Tayoho Vibhakta Pantha. This is the 15th sutra. What it means? The Vijnanavadins view that object and Chittam, awareness or knowledge or understanding, they are the same. In other words, an object has no existence other than its awareness in our mind. Now, this is absolutely unacceptable. That is what Patanjali says. Patanjali says this is totally unacceptable. And of course, Vyasa will place before you many arguments. Vastu Samya. Vastu Samya actually means, it means mind and object, they are the same. This view of Vijnanavadins, if you accept this, then how do you explain Chitta Bheda? You may see an object and that object will create one sensation in your mind. Suppose you get the news that suddenly you have become a millionaire. That kind of language, at least most of you will understand. Suddenly you feel you have hit a huge lottery. Maybe your share have gone up and you hit it. Maybe you suddenly have got, your shares, stocks gone up and you get $1 million suddenly. And now somebody who is not friendly with you, that person will listen to this news with a different mindset, a different approach. If you go to a museum, let us say you are seeing an object, hundreds of, maybe thousands of people may look at the same object in a museum. These hundreds of people, thousands of people do not have the same identical sensation. Some people may be happy, some people will be less happy, and some people may not be very happy at all. When somebody who is not your friend hears the news that you have got $1 million, he may not be very happy about it. You are very happy, your friends are very happy about it. So, event or objects and mind are the same, then the sensation response of the mind to the same event, the same object should be identical. So, Chitta Bheda means there is a difference with regard to the reaction of the mind. Chitta means Bheda means difference. So, sometimes mind will be happy about an object, seeing an object, or experiencing some event. Sometimes mind will be unhappy, sometimes will be depressed. So why is this difference? If object and mind are the same, then 1,000 people having an experience will have the same identical experience. Not necessarily. We ourselves will have one experience now when we see an object, and after some time, that object may produce its opposite feeling in our mind. So why this difference? Chitta Bheda, there is a difference in terms of our reaction, our sensation in our chittam or mind. In other words, one object, but many mental perceptions, many mental sensitivities. Therefore, they may not be the same. Object doesn't change. If in your, maybe you pursue a chair, maybe you are looking at a great painting, and you are a great painter yourself, or you may be seeing a great architectural marvel. If you are yourself an architect, you may appreciate the architectural marvel in one way. If you see Taj Mahal, if you see pyramid, if you are a historian, if you are yourself an architect, you may feel extremely elevated. But somebody who is not trained in architecture may not be able to have the same appreciation of this wonderful pyramid as you, because you are trained in appreciating the beauty of architecture. Your friend may not be trained. So, but the pyramid is the same. Pyramid object is the same. But at the same time, two minds, two persons look at the same object differently. Vastu Samya means identity, sameness, the same object, but Chitta Bheda, but mind perceives in two different ways, or maybe so many different ways. And our own reaction, sensibility can change, can become happy, unhappy, and so on. Oh, now we are happy, another time we may be unhappy with regard to the same object. Therefore, Patanjali says, mind and object are two different things. In other words, he says that objective world has an ontological status, ontological existence, independent of perceiving minds. That means it's a complete refutation of Buddhist Vijnanavada, and of course, because Buddhist Vijnanavada, the literature is very huge and very, very deep, so it goes much deeper than Berkeley's Vijnanavada. So this is the way. Now, if you look at the commentary, it's very, very important commentary. It's a very famous commentary. Before going to the 15th Sutra, I shall just read the last portion of Vyasa's commentary on the 14th Sutra, where Vyasa begins to make his views very clear with regard to Vijnanavada. So the commentary is just the last paragraph of Vyasa's commentary. Nastyartho Vijnana Visagacharaha asti tu Jnanamartham Visagacharam Swapnado Kalpidam Idi Anaya Disha Ye Vastu Sarupam Apaknuvade Jnana Parikalpana Matram Vastu Swapna Vishayopamam Na Paramarthadaha Astidi Ye Ahu Te Tatha Idi Pratibasthabidam Samahatmena Vastu Katham Apramanatvena Vigalpa Jnana Belena Vastu Surubam Utsrijya Tadeva Apalavantaha Sadheya Vachana Siku. It's a very famous, and of course it refers to some of the previous sutras of Patanjali. So at the beginning, Vyasa is refuting the Vijnanavada Buddhist view of, maybe means Vijnanavadis negate the object, the reality of objective universe. Vyasa says, no, objective universe does have a reality. Objects do have an existence independent of mind or perceiving mind. Now, the commentary is this. Nasti arthaga vijnana visakacharaka asti. That means, people, Vijnanavadin say, vijnana visakacharaka asti artha nasti means objective world or external objects have no real existence independent or devoid of mental perception. This is the argument. And then they say, what is the argument? Their argument is, there is no object without being perceived with consciousness. In other words, that's their view. If there is an object, it exists only so long as we perceive it. Without an object, there is no awareness. In other words, there is awareness without object, but there is no object without awareness. So what they say, you perceive a chair and the chair is gone. Maybe somebody has taken away that chair, but your awareness of the existence of that chair is still in your mind and they remain as memory, sensation, samskaras, vasanas, etc. But object is gone. In other words, your awareness remains in your mind, but the external objects of which you are aware, that is gone. It can disappear. You may have seen something yesterday, this morning, but it's not there in front of you, but its awareness, its knowledge is there in your mind. Therefore, awareness can exist independent of object. Objects cannot exist independent of awareness. Awareness means vijnana. So you can say awareness, vijnanam, chittam, knowledge, all these should be more or less understood to be identical in this particular context. So this is the argument. This is the Vijnanavadin's argument, remember, which Vyasa is not willing to agree. Means there is no object without being associated with awareness or Vijnanam. But without an object, it is possible for you to have knowledge or Vijnana. This is the argument. So, nasti artho vijnana visagacharaka asti. To jnanam artham visagacharam. Swapnadu. So, it means, for example, in dreams, for example. In dream, you see many things. You are aware of all. There are awareness, but those things may not exist in the external world. But awareness is there. So, awareness is greater than external objects. External objects are dependent upon awareness. Vastu is dependent upon vijnanam or chittam. That's the implication here. So, swapnadu, like daydreaming, maybe daydream also. Dream also or daydream also. Kalpidam idi anaya disha ye vastu sarupam avaknuvade. In other words, they refute the reality of objects. They refuse to accept the reality of external object. Vastu means external object. Saruva means its existence. Apaknuvade means they refuse to accept or they reject. This is Vijnana view, Vijnanavadin's view. Jnana parikalpana matram vastu. In other words, an object is nothing but a parikalpana, a perception taking place in the mind. Objective universe has no existence independent of the perceiving mind. And they say object is only a creation of mind. That's their view. An external object is only a creation of mind. This is the Vijnanavadin's view. Swapna vishopamam na paramarthadaga asti. This is a view. External objects have no real reality. Paramarthadaga, nasti. In reality, external objects do not exist. It is only a creation of mind or perception. Te tathaidi pratibusthapitam. Sama. Now they talk like that. Now the point is external objects. So mahatmena vastu. Actually, external objects exist independent of whether they are perceived by you or not. Why? Because if you are not perceiving an external object, another person is perceiving. Suppose there is a chair in front of you, you close your eyes. Jnanavadins will tell you the chair doesn't exist because you don't see it, you don't perceive it, except in memory. But another person looking at the same chair is perceiving that chair. So you can find, if it is just a creation of the mind, then the external object should cease to exist when you don't perceive it, even for others, but others continue experiencing that object. You may have closed your eyes, but others have opened their eyes, they're perceiving it. So Vyasa uses a strong language here, Katham apramanagattvena vikalpa jnana belena. Vikalpa, vikalpa is one of the vrittis, vrittaya panchadaya. You can find pramana, vibirya, vikalpa, nidra, sprutaya. These are the 5 vrittis. What is vikalpa? Vikalpa is shabda jnanuvadi vastu shunyaha. It is just a verbal formation. See, for example, Vandhyaputra, Gandharva Nagara, Khapuspa. Let us say a flower in the sky, Khapuspa. Or Gandharva Nagara, a city in the sky. Just a verbal expression. It's not even a pramana. It is just a verbal expression without a corresponding reality. That's how Vijnanavadins interpret this word. Samsaram Swapnamayakhim. I already quoted from Lankavadara Sutra earlier. Lankavadara Sutra is a very important document for Vijnanavadins. So Dignaga, Vasubandhu, all of them accept that as an important text. So Vyasa says, Buddhists, Vijnanavadins tell you that this external world is only vikalpa. Vikalpa means Shabda Jnananubadi Vastu Sunyaha Vikalpaha. Vastu Sunya, there is no object, but it's just a word, a verbal expression. Let us say, for example, the horns of a hare. Hare cannot have horns, but it's possible for you to construct such a word. That is a word without a corresponding reality. Like that, Vijnanavadins tell you the external world is only a vikalpa. And then he's asking a question, Vastu Surupam Utsrujya. They reject the reality of external objects. Tadeva Balabanta Saddheya Vajanasyahu. So how can you consider their words to be authentic, to be taken seriously? This is the conclusion of Vyasa's commentary on, I think it's a 14th sutra. So again, samsaram swapnamaya kim nacha karma vinashyati. Karma doesn't cease to exist. But samsara, external world, it has no existence other than when you are aware of it, other than the form of awareness in your mind. This is the 14th sutra. After that, we will come to, I think, the 15th sutra. Before that, of course, we have to, this, the well-known statement is there, which I already made, I think, yeah. So here, of course, you have to remember to understand this, especially in the next sutra, which is more famous, and the sutra is Vastu Sami Chitta Bhed chitta bhedat payoho vibhakta pantha. We'll discuss this now. What it fundamentally means is vastu samya. Object is the same, but chitta bheda. Mind perceives differently. The same object makes one person happy, another person unhappy. So the chitta bheda is there. Vastu samya means object is the same. Therefore, the object should have an existence independent of the perceiving mind. That's the argument that Patanjali is putting forward. So the commentary is very famous here. Bahuchittavalambani bhudam ekam vastu sadharanam. The bahuchittavalambani bhudam ekam vastu. I mean, ekam vastu, same object. But that object may be perceived by many minds, many people. It is very common. It's not just, and it is not just perceived by one mind, nor by many minds, but it has an existence by itself. That's what Vyasa says. Tat khalu naika chitta parigalpidam napi aneka chitta parigalpidam kindu supradishtham. Whether one person or one mind or several persons, several minds perceive an object or not, the object does have a independent existence. This is what Vyasa is saying here. Bahuchittavalambani bhudam ekam vastu sadharanam. It is very common. You can find the same object. It is bahuchittavalambani bhudam. It is the object of many kinds of perceptions, many perceiving minds, creating different sensations in different minds. Same object. Therefore, that objective world should have an entity. Now, in its more extreme form of Vijnanavada, you find some of them will tell you that you have eaten food, you have drunk water, it's real only so long as you are aware of it. But Shankaracharya actually in this Brahma Sutra, there is one sutra, na bhava upalabdhehi. What it means is it's also a refutation of Vijnanavada, especially put forward by Asanga, Vasubandhu and others. A very famous sutra means Vijnanavada. One of the well-known books is called Vijnapti Matrada Siddhi. And Vasubandhu has written a commentary called Vimshatika. It's called Vijnapti Matram Evaidat. Everything is Vijnapti. Vijnapti means Vijnanam, mental perception. The whole universe is nothing but mental perception. You can see how Berkeley must have got this idea from some source or other, some translations of other Vijnanavada books, because the idea doesn't occur any time before Buddhist philosophy, especially Vasubandhu, who actually wrote this Vimshatika. This is a commentary on Vijnapti Matrata Siddhi, famous text on Yogacara. Yogacara is another term for Vijnanavada philosophy. So Vasubandhu, he makes a statement, Vijnapti Matram evaitat asat arthavabhasanat yatha taimarigasya asat keshadi darshan. And he says, suppose you have got a problem with your eyes, you may see certain things, though they may not be existing. So, like that, now, suppose a person has a problem with his eyes and he is looking at an object. He may see that object in totally different from how it is perceived by others. That distorted perception is the reality so far as that person is concerned, because the problem with his eyes can only give him a distorted vision, distorted understanding of that object. So if you have got a problem with your eye, you may see an object, a white object you may see as yellow, a yellow object you may see as white. So far as you are concerned, it is what you perceive. The object itself is yellow or white depending upon the condition of your eyes. That is the view of Vijnanavad. That's why, you know, Vijnapti matram eva idat. Edat sarvam Vijnapti matram. Everything is only Vijnanam, perception. Asat arthavasana yatha taimirikasya asat keshadi dasya. A person may not have hairs, but if you have a problem with your eyes, then you may see a person endowed with long hair. That is this well-known writer. Of course, remember, all these ideas have themselves some very profound implications. It's the glorious evolution of world thought. At least you can find echo in the later subjective idealists like the subjective idealism of George Berkeley. Shankaracharya, he tries to respond to this view of Vijnanavada. That is very interesting to see. Vijnanavadins will tell you, suppose you had a wonderful meal and you've eaten food. Vijnanavadins will tell you, so long as you remember that you have a wonderful meal, it is real, otherwise it is not. Evam prapte bhrumaha na bhava ulabdhehi iti khalu says na khalu abhavo bahyartha sadhyava sadhum shakyade kasma uvalabdhehi uvalabdhehi pradipratyam bahyartha sambhava kutyam ghadapada iti. This means yathahi kaschit bunjano bhujisadhyayam trukto swayam anubhuyamanayam eva ruyat naham bunje nava trupyami iti. You see what? Yam evam bruyat na aham bunje nava truptyamidi. No, somebody had a wonderful meal, but according to Vijnanavadins, that is a reality only so long as the person remembers or aware or still retains in his mind a memory that he had a wonderful meal. Otherwise, he did not have that it doesn't exist. Similarly, when you see an external object, kutyam stambha, kutyam ghata padayidi, you see a wall or maybe a pillar or maybe a pot, maybe cloth. All these are there. Now, these are real only so long as the awareness exists in your mental system. Otherwise, they have no reality. Shankaracharya says, the pot is there, the wall is there, the cloth is there, but they will not be there all the time. A pot in the shape of an object in which you can store water, made of clay. That is there, but that is there only so long as it remains in that shape, in that form. Then it's called kata, means a pot. You break it, it becomes mrit, becomes clay. So it exists only for the time being. And all these exist for the time being, but they are not totally non-existent. This is an important point in Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedantists do not reject the reality of external world. They only will tell you that this external world doesn't exist all the time. They are not eternal. Why? Because they are subject to changes. You break a pot, it changes and becomes clay. A pot maker turns, he produces, he manufactures a pot out of clay. So the clay becomes the pot, it's a change, and you break it, the pot goes back to its clay form. That means it changed. So it means it is not absolutely real, but it is not absolutely unreal. It is subject to changes. It is relative. So actually, Shankaracharya in his commentaries, he brings about a reconciliation between, you may call it subjective idealism and objective idealism. Objective idealism will tell you that external world is externally real. And subjective idealism will tell you the external world exists only so long as you perceive it. So Advaita actually brings about a reconciliation by putting forward the idea of Vyavaharika Satta. Everything in this world is real in the relative sense. In the absolute sense, this world is not real. Similarly, in the absolute sense, in this world is not unreal. It is neither absolutely real nor absolutely unreal. It is real only in the relative sense, or it is unreal in the relative sense. Both statements are equally correct. So having said that, let us go back to Vyasa's commentary on Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Okay, now again, Vyasa makes some very profound statement. Tat khalu naika chitta parikalpidam napi aneka chitta parikalpidam kindu supradishtham. He says, an object sitting in front of you has got an existence by virtue of its own existence. Whether one person perceives it or many persons perceive it, irrespective of whether it is perceived or not, external objects do have a reality, whether they are perceived or not. That is Vyasa's assertion here. Vastusami chitta bheda dharmapeksham chittasya vastusami abhi sukhajnanam bhavati adharmapeksham tataeva dukhajnanam avidyapeksham tataeva mudhajnanam sammik darshanapeksham tataeva madhyasthijnanam iti. That means, if objects and chitta, if objects and mind were the same, if objects exist only depending upon perception of the mind, then why is it that perceptions of mind can vary from person to person? Perception of the same object can be different for different persons. So he says, for example, you know, dharmapeksham chittasya vastusami abhi sukhajnanam. Suppose your mind, you are in a good mood, good samskaras. Depending upon that, when you see an object, it makes you happy. Adharmapeksham, a negative samskaras, it makes you unhappy. Again, avidyapeksham, suppose you have some misunderstanding or not, you don't have proper understanding of an object, then you'll have a delusion, you may be deluded, you may be seeing something, but you don't know what object is. So avidyapeksham means you are ignorant as to what it actually is. So you may have a lot of confusion. So mudhajnanam, it can create delusions, wrong understanding, and so on. Sammik darshanapeksham, suppose you have proper understanding, then you know what happens. Tadaiva madhyasthijnanam, then you have a very unprejudiced, proper, objective, correct understanding. When we have correct understanding, we can have a very objective, clear perception or judgment of anything. But if you are not aware of what it is, your perception may be highly cluttered or may be highly deluded. Again, your perception of an object and the reaction of your mind can always depend upon how your mind is, in what condition your mind is right now. If you are in a happy mood, you can feel happy when you see an object. If you're in an unhappy mood, you will be unhappy. So dharmapeksham, adharmapeksham, sammik darshanapeksham. So all these different conditionalities are mentioned by Vyasa. If your mind is in a good samskara, in a good mood, you will have sukhajnanam. If it is in an unhappy mood, you may have dukhajnanam, means unpleasant perception. If it is in a state of equilibrium, if your mind is in a state of stability, then you may have a very, very objective, proper understanding. Neither leaning in one direction, either it's very good or be very bad. You will have a very proper, unprejudiced, a proper, dispassionate understanding of an object. So all these variations with regard to perception show that objective world does have an existence independent of perceiving minds. An object exists whether it is perceived by one person or many persons. So this is how Vyasa is trying in his commentary to answer, to confront the problem of the unreality of objective world propounded by Vijnanavadis. Now you can have interaction. I know it's a bit complicated, but we should also learn to enjoy the evolution of world thought over the last several centuries. All these constitute the precious wealth of human civilization, intellectual civilization especially. Thank you. We can have interaction. Most welcome. Questions?
Namaskar, Maharaj.
So, namaskar.
I was monitoring the Facebook feed, which I think may have ended.
Yeah.
There may have been a technical problem there.
Yeah.
At the time that I was viewing it, I didn't see any questions.
Okay.
But there is a question. There is a question and answer on the YouTube.
Yeah.
How to, let's see. Different levels of consciousness have different perceptions towards everything. Mind and object are different based on each chitta. We are only looking at things from the color of our lens. How to permanently become situated in this understanding? I understand it at all levels, but why do we forget it when dealing with the external world? There was a response. So the chat continues with a response. I think the whole point is that each of our chitta is different based on many past lives, and that influence each of our perceptions of the object. And this might be the foundation for future sutras. So the students are having a dialogue here.
Interesting. Anyway, interesting. So there are two aspects with about today's session. One is, I mean, it's a bit academic and deals with the evolution of different systems of thought, Buddhist philosophy, and also yoga philosophy, and also Vedanta philosophy. And the second aspect is, what are we to do with this, with all this? So I shall deal with the later problem. But the answer is, Vedanta brings about a reconciliation between the two contrasting views that you may have found here. One is subjective idealism put forward by Vijnanavadins. They believe that everything depends upon mind. External objects do not have any existence independent of mind. Now, that is actually a very unrealistic view. The reason why I had to take you back to the early centuries when these philosophical systems evolved. You know, there were two schools of realism, Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas. They were extreme realists in Buddhist tradition. They did believe the reality of external world. So very often the idealists wrote these books in response to the schools of realism that emerged within Buddhism itself. But what Shankaracharya did was, he said, well, you are right. He told Vijnanavadins, you are perfectly right that external world, external objects do not have existence. But one correction, external world doesn't have an existence in the sense it doesn't have an eternal existence. It changes, so it is not eternally real. It's not real with the capital letter R. But you cannot deny the relative reality. You cannot say, after having a heavy meal, wonderful meal, you cannot say, no, I did not eat. You have seen a pot in front of you, and then you close your eyes. You cannot say, no, there is no pot in front of me. You cannot say that. In fact, that's the language he uses in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya, referring to that. So he says, external things, external objects do have an existence only in the relative sense. They don't have an absolute existence, because they change. Anything that is subject to changes cannot be said to be absolutely real. So they are real only in the relative sense. But at the same time, they are not absolutely unreal, because we are experiencing this objective universe. We live in this world. We will deal with different objects in this world. So we cannot deny their relative existence. So Shankaracharya brings about a reconciliation. That's why I mentioned earlier, Swami Vivekananda, when he interpreted Yoga Sutras, he somehow connects yoga philosophy to Vedanta. That is, in fact, that's one of the reasons why many scholars have no doubt that Vyasa, who wrote this commentary, himself was the author of Brahma Sutras. That's one view, because Brahma Sutras, 554 sutras, Vyasa wrote, Padarayana Sutra, same Vyasa wrote this well-known Badarayana Sutras. But you had to remember that subjective idealism in India doesn't begin with Vijnanavadins. Subjective idealism, in one way or other, one shade or another, did exist even during the pre-Buddhist period. But it took a definite shape with the emergence of the great Buddhist scholars during the post-Buddha period. That's
Maharaj, I've often seen the description of the commentator Vijnana Bhikshu as a great bridge between Hinduism and Buddhism.
Yeah.
But from your description today, it sounds as though the bridge was already there.
Yeah, bridge only was there, Vyasa. Yeah. Vyasa, let's say he Vastu Swami Chitta Bheda means, with regard to same object, different minds perceive differently the same object. So we cannot say that an external world, external object doesn't independently exist, independent of perception. They do exist independent of perception. So in a, in these views, actually, this also effectively refutes subjective idealism of Berkeley. Of course.
You mentioned the practical aspects, the impact of this philosophy on us. I'm curious what you meant by the practical import.
Yeah, I think it is the idea that the external world as such doesn't count for much. There is a higher truth than what we see in front of us. So that view, it slowly emerges in so many systems of philosophy. I mean, there is more to the reality than what we perceive with our mind and the five senses of perception. So any system of philosophy that takes you beyond phenomenalism, extreme kind of realism, it is always welcome. So in that respect, Buddhist Vijnanavada has got a great relevance. Any system of philosophy that takes you beyond empiricism and phenomenalism, kind of extreme realism, which actually reduces human beings to eating and living animals, that's a problem. Really speaking, if you just believe that only what we see in front of us alone exists, then there may not be much meaning or logic for higher music, higher art, literature, poetry, or spirituality. So there is something much more than what we see in front of us. So in that respect, the total rejection of external world that you find in Vijnanavada, it takes you, it takes you, catches you by the throat and takes you out of the stranglehold of phenomenalist realism.
I'm going to take a risk and just add that it seems less mature and perhaps even arrogant to think that it only exists if I'm aware that I'm perceiving it. That
Yeah,
I mean that puts so much weight
yeah,
on
yeah,
my own
yeah.
my own perception that it seems ridiculous. But
Yeah,
that's
solipsism. It's called solipsism.
yeah.
Yeah, it is. There's an element of intellectual arrogance, and also that's a doorway to philosophical anarchy. In fact, kind of intellectual anarchy. Everything is in mind only. That can be very dangerous and very, very misleading. In fact, there are many, even many, unfortunately, so to speak, many scholars who have not studied Vedanta properly, who would tell you that Shankaracharya taught this world is like an unreal. Shankaracharya did not teach the world is unreal in the absolute sense. That's why, I quoted this Bhashya, where Shankaracharya, he takes pains to tell you that no, the external world, the world that we see in front of us, does have an existence, but not in the absolute sense. See, the sutra is na bhavaha ubalabdhege. The meaning is this very simple. You see, external objects do not have non-existence. That's the real meaning of this sutra. Na bhavaha ubalabdhehi. The reason is because they are perceived. An external object is perceived. Therefore, you cannot say they do not have existence because that perception doesn't remain in your mind. That's why, and he uses the word bahyarthavadam. Bahyarthavada means this is actually it's a Buddhist scholars. Anyway, so the idea is Shankaracharya makes it very clear that external objects do not have non-existence. External objects do not have non-existence. That's the meaning of this sutra. Now, abhavaha. Abhava means non-existence. Na means no. That's meaning. For bahyarthanam na bhava, in that sense, that's the idea behind it. External objects do not have non-existence. That's the meaning of the sutra. Sanskrit construction is a bit roundabout, That's the language, the structure of the language, the style of the language. So I'm sure that our audience have fully enjoyed this most profound philosophical discussions. Thank you.
Oh,
We will,
Maharaj, there were more questions. I see
okay,
hands
then
up.
most welcome, most welcome. Yeah, most welcome, please.
Maharaj, I think today got it. You said that the existence, the object exists because of the perception, because of the chitta. Now, what is the whole point of this? Is it a foundation for a future discussion?
No. The point is, okay, you are asking this very important question. The point is, yoga philosophers, their view with regard to the ontological status of the universe, the world, is different from the view of Vijnanavadis. So one of the possible answers to your question is that during the time when Vyasa wrote these commentaries, this Vyasa, we have to remember, most probably this Vyasa must have been a Vyasa, other than the Vyasa who wrote Mahabharata, including Bhagavad Gita, or the one who edited the Vedas. This, Vyasa, there were so many Vyasas. So this is one of the proof that there's so many Vyasas. When Vyasa wrote this commentary, most probably, you have to remember the historical context. this view of the subjective idealism, the view that external objects do not have any ontological status, any status of reality, that view must have been raging in those times. Today, if you are writing a book on philosophy, you have to bring in many views in philosophy and logic, which are current in our times. So unless you get an idea of the evolution of Indian thought, and unless you get an idea, why you may ask the question, why Shankaracharya worried so much about what Imams are telling? No, but when you see in Bay Area, the Intel, Infosys, whatever, maybe in India, wherever, we don't see any Imams conducting Vedic rituals. So why Shankaracharya worried so much? You have to think of the times in which he lived. Similarly, when Kant, for example, we talks about, actually Kant was responding to the influence of phenomenalism and again this subjective idealism. Kant didn't agree with this. Kant refuted this critical pure reason. So you may ask the question, why Kant bothered about this? You have to ask Kant, who lived much in an earlier era. Similarly, when Vyasa wrote this comment, you have to remember, perhaps this view must have been raging the most popular subject for discussion those times. As you dare remember the historical context. Somebody will ask, I know that many people are terribly offended. Why Shankaracharya asked these highly complicated questions and arguments and logic and epistemology and hermeneutics? Why did he make a statement clearly? But you have to think of the times in which he lived and his mission. Sri Ramakrishna lived in 19th century, later half of 19th century. I mean, he taught in the later half of 19th century. Look at Sri Ramakrishna's style, very simple. Sri Ramakrishna doesn't take pains to refute the Mimamsakas or the Charvakas or Shunyavadins, because they were not there anywhere to be seen in Calcutta when Sri Ramakrishna lived. So he talks about the simple believers, different people, these Kesha Chandra Sen, Brahma Samaj, they were the raging people. So Sri Ramakrishna talks about Brahma Samaj, new Brahma Jnanis, Brahma Samaj. And he's talking about people who have different views, religions. So similarly, a great teacher, when he lives and teaches, he has to, in one way, he is a product of his times. Secondly, you can find he is the result of an evolution of a spiritual, intellectual, philosophical culture. Sri Ramakrishna taught the same eternal Vedic truths, but using different vocabulary, different analogies, different similes, because he lived in different contexts, historical context. Christ, again, he lived in entirely different, different time, different age. So the language he used, the similes, the analogies he used were the right ones for those times. Look at Buddha's Jataka tales. You can find that the analogies, the illustrations he used, they belong to an ancient era. So we have to remember the context, historical context. But the truth is the same, historical context is different. Okay, thank you.
There is another question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
Maharaj, I understand it that when a person, there's an echo here, when a person uses as much of their understanding and knowledge to attain or reach Brahman or their Atman, there comes a certain point where their knowledge is no longer useful for getting there. And from what I understand is there are certain sages and saints who have realized Brahman. And I think they say when that happens, the world disappears. There is no
Yeah.
There is no relative world. Is that correct?
Okay. The world, as world disappears, the world exists as non-different from Brahman. This is an important thing. You know, the world disappearing, that should be understood in the correct Vedantic sense. What it means is, I can explain this in the light of the classical analogy illustration, because the ancient illustration is so apt and right on the spot. See the dark room, suppose a semi-dark room, there's some light, not enough light. So an object is lying on the floor. It can be mistaken to be a snake because there's not enough light. The shape, the color, the size, everything makes you feel, well, it could be a snake. It could be, of course, there are different options given in Vedanta literature, Jaladhara, Danda, Bhuchitra, and so on. But Sarpa, people may mistake, well, that object is a snake, but actually it is a rope. It's a rope, but is mistaken to be a snake because there is not enough light. When you bring light, what happens? The snake doesn't run away from it. The object that you earlier mistook to be a snake is now perceived in the broad light to be what it is. It is a rope. Now, similarly, when you reach that the highest Advaitic experience, the world as you see it does disappear. But the world is again perceived to be non-different from Brahman. Brahma Satyam, Jagat Satyam is the highest experience. Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya is the philosophical conclusion. When we evolve towards that experience, we want to realize Brahman. And then when we realize Brahman, this world doesn't go away as such. The world as we earlier understood, this world is, because before we realize the truth of Brahman, we think this world is the only reality. This world is the only absolute reality. There is nothing else. That world disappears. This world is again perceived to be non-different from Brahman. The object that you earlier mistook to be a snake is now properly understood to be the rope it is. Similarly, what happens, when a person reaches Brahman, he may be living this world, but in his mind, he knows this world as its name and form, it is not eternal. It is coming and going. That feeling will be always there as a deep inner conviction. When does it work? When something happens, when you lose money, when somebody gets some news from doctor, well, health is not good, he's not shocked, she's not shocked, because he understands, well, this body is bound to fall sick one day or other, because this body is not eternal, like this world is not eternal. So that proper mature understanding is the only difference between a person who has attained Brahmajnanam and a person who has not attained Brahmajnanam. That's the only difference. Sri Ramakrishna also fell sick, but for him, the sick body was not his reality.
Yeah.
He didn't worry about the body falls, all right, fine, no problem. He did not cry and weep and worry and complain, no. He also underwent some treatment. He was willing to take some treatment, but he was not weeping and crying. Okay, cancer, that's the nature of the body. And he didn't worry about it. He did not even pray for to Mother, Divine Mother, for remedy, because body is coming and going. So actually, when we are able to look upon our own body as if we are looking a stick that we are holding in our hand. Suppose you're holding a stick in your hand or a chair, somebody hits the chair, you don't feel a pain because that person is not hitting you, he's hitting only chair that is holding in your hand. Similarly, we are able to, when we dissociate ourselves from this body identity, we are able to look upon this body of ours as is it is not ours. It's like a chair you're holding in your hand. If it falls sick, all right, it should fall sick, no problem. So that's the only difference between a Brahmajnani and an ignorant person. Okay, thank you. Please continue.
The example of the snake and the stick, is that because when we're in the relative world, we see the snake and we fear, and it could mean death, and it leads to not understanding the reality, the divine reality. But when a person reaches the state like Arjuna was looking for and Krishna was helping us towards, if you see the snake, if you see a snake, it couldn't possibly be dangerous because there's no success, no failure, no good or bad. But it is an object, but it's Brahman, it's all one. Is that why the snake and the stick are used?
The snake and rope analogy is used only in a limited context. So we should not take an example beyond the context. Example is only partially justified. This is a central principle in Vedantic logic. An example should only be taken in its limited context. So here the only sense in which it is to be understood is, so long as we don't pursue the reality for what it is, we will have a lot of misunderstandings. When we really get the higher experience, then our earlier misunderstandings will not bother us.
Okay.
So that should be an important point. When we reach that experience, then these questions will not arise at all.
Okay.
That's why example should not be chased, followed beyond its narrow, limited context. Beyond that, example has no meaning. Suppose you give the example, there are many examples. We don't go deeper into examples. Examples are meant to play a very limited role. This is a central principle in Vedanta. Drishtanta means example. Dashtantika means what it tries to exemplify. So there is a limited context in which they should be understood, not beyond that. So when we actually reach a kind of experience, then many of the earlier questions that we may ask, those questions are not answered. Those questions cease to be questions. We laugh at ourselves. I actually raised this question, how foolish it was on my part to raise this question, because questions are not really answered in spiritual life. You transcend that level in which you ask those questions. So questions are no more questions. That's how questions disappear. They don't get answers. They just disappear.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So now I have some very important announcement for all of you. That is, one important announcement is, of course, many of you attend the Gita class. There will be no Bhagavad Gita class from next Friday onwards. The next Bhagavad Gita class is Friday, January 21st. And remember, we have a Christmas program on December 25th, 11 a.m. Christian values in 21st century. That's a subject of discussion. December 25th, 11 a.m. Saturday. The talk is at 11 a.m. Christian values in the 21st century. This is an important thing. And again, we have an important celebration January 1st, Saturday, January 1st, 2022, 10 a.m. We have puja, worship, fire ceremony in the new temple, 2323 Value Street. So to attend, please RSVP only on our website, savedanta.org. And it should be done by December 23rd RSVP. And then another very important information is an announcement regarding winter retreat. Our annual winter retreat will take place on January 8th and 9th, 2022. The topic for discussion during this winter retreat is climate change and human behavior, Vedic and Vedantic perspectives. Winter retreat is only for 2 days, one session on each day from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. 1 hour lecture, 30 minutes interaction, question answer. Saturday 8th January and Sunday 9th January, 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. And then please remember, there will be no class on Patanjali Yoga Sutras from now onwards. So we have winter races, and we will from 26th December to 15th January, and our next Patanjali Yoga Sutra classes will be only after 15th January. Then is 15th January will be the last day of winter races. So please remember, there will be no Patanjali Yoga Sutra classes during the Christmas races.
Maharaj, does that mean the next Yoga Sutra class is Sunday, January 16th?
Yeah, it will. The next Patanjali Yoga Sutra classes will be January 16th, Sunday. Thank you. Please remember, next Yoga Sutra class on January 16th, Sunday. And Happy New Year, Happy Christmas, for all of you. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.